We're about to start the Mishnah here at the beginning of the next parak, Chaf Aleph. But before that, we still have to figure in. We spoke about Egla Rufa, Tarasa Mitzora. These are all mitzvahs that have to be fulfilled during the day. And we derive these from Sukkim. As far as Ktsiras Omer is concerned, Sviras Omer, that's Balayla. Ahavas Omer is by day. Hekter Chalovim Vevarim is the entire night. And then we were focused on the Zeh Klal. Let's just review the Zeh Klal. Kol Dover Shemitzvasa Bayom Kosher Kol Hayom. And the Gemara asks, Zeh Klal Lasuye Mai? Lasuye Sidur Bazichin Vesiluk HaBazichin. This reflects the sheet of Rabbi Yossi, that when they removed the Bazichin of the Levona on Shabbos, and there were two bazichin, one on the top of each marach of 6 lechem aponim on the shulchan. They did that during the morning of Shabbos. They would replace the lechem and the bazichin later on during the day, and there was a time period in which there was nothing on the shulchan. Here to Rabbi Yossi, the sign of Rabbi Yossi Omer, silek es hayeshana shachris v'sider es hachadosha arvis. That's fine. So that he put the Levona on the Shulchan in the morning on Shabbos, and he replaced it with the new Levona. So he removed the Levona Shachris, and he replaced it with the new Levona in the afternoon. There's no problem with that. But what do I do with the pasuk that says, V'nasata ala Shulchan lechem panim lefonai tamid shelo yeh Hashulchan below lechem. What this means is, according to Rabbi Yossi's Shita, that we cannot leave the shulchan overnight. That's called lina. To leave the shulchan empty overnight, shelo yolin shulchan below lechem. That's unacceptable, and therefore the word tamid. But during the course of the day, we can have the lechem munach al shulchan at the beginning of the day, and at the end of the day, we replace it with the new lechem for the next week, and that's called tamid. The Chachamim disagree. Their shita is reflected, is recorded, I should say, in the Mishnah, in Menachos Tzadik Tes, Amud Beis. They hold the word tamid means that the shulchan should never have 1 minute without lechem. And therefore they hold that immediately with the siluk al-lechem and bazichin of last week, they immediately replace it. They take one and replace it with the other. And they had 4 kohanim that would be involved in the Seder Alechem Aponim Shnayim. 2 would be Masalik last week's Starim, and 2 would be involved in Bimeniach and placing down the new Starim to replace the other ones. And Yodo Shal Kohen, Hameniach es ha-Seder HaChodosh haya omeid neged Yodo Shal Kohen ha-Masalik es Seder HaYoshan. So one Kohen would take it off, and the other Kohen would put down, and there was never a moment where the shulchan was reikon. It's coming. The Mishnah continues, Zeh Klal Dover Shemitzvasa Balayla Kosher Kol Halayla. Lasuye Mai. We always interpret a Zeh Klal as coming to include something that's not explicit in the list, in the enumerated list. Lasuye Achilas Psochim Delo Kireb Elazar ben Azariah, which means that the achila of the Pesach on the night of the 15th can be achieved during the entire course of the night. And that's against Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. That reflects the sheet of the Chacham. The sign we learned in the Brisa, it says in Shmos Yud Beis, this week's parasha, Parshas Bo, Achilas Psochim, it says, V'yochlas ha'bosa b'layla hazeh, Omer Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Nemar kan b'layla hazeh, v'nemar lahalon b'layla hazeh. In the next part of the parsha there, in Shmos Yud Beis, it speaks about Makas B'choros. It says, V'yavarti V'eretz Mitzrayim b'layla hazeh. So twice, in the context of about, shall we say, 3, 4 psukim, it says b'layla hazeh. And that gives us an equation between the two. Just like in the case of Laila, with regard to Makas B'choros ad Chatzos, the Torah says that Makas B'choros was at Chatzos, midnight. Af, so to the Laila, here, Khan, in Achilas Pesachim, is Ad Chatzos, up to the middle of the night. Our Mishnah holds, against Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that Achilas HaPesach is during the entire course of the night, reflecting the sheet of the Chacham that argue against Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. And that is also reflected by Rabbi Akiva Shita in Brachos Daf Tes, that we derive from what it says, V'achaltem oso b'chipazon, that Pesach is nechal b'shas chipazon. And that's the shah sheba nechpezu lotzeis Mitzrayim, and that's halos hashaka. So though they were freed from slavery at midnight, but they didn't leave Mitzrayim until daybreak on the 15th. As it says in Shmos Yud Beis, Lo teitzu ish mi Pesach beso ad haboker. And they didn't leave Mitzrayim until the boker. Even according to Rabbi Akiva, it's awesome Rabbanan to eat the Pesach after Chatzos, because the Chachamim instituted a gzeira that anything that's mitzvos of a laila should be fulfilled before Chatzos. The Rashba writes at the beginning of Brachos that according to Rabbi Akiva, the Korban Pesach is nechal out of boker. There's no Yisur Rabbanan at all to eat the Pesach after Chatzos. And according to the Rashba, Rabbi Akiva holds that the Chacham did not institute that harchaka, that siag, to require that we eat the Korban Pesach before Chatzos. Now we're about to begin the new perek, the third perek, HaKorei Oved, which comes to continue the laws of Kriyas HaMegillah, and also some of the laws of Kriyas HaTorah and Tefillah B'tzibur and so forth. Now, according to the Seder, the Talmud, Avli, this is the third perek, and it comes before the next perek, the fourth perek, which is called B'nei Ha'ir. B'nei Ha'ir, is that correct? If we have it here, you have B'nei Ha'ir. However, it seems from the Tosfos Yontif that there is another Seder in which this perek would come actually as the fourth perek after B'nei Ha'ir. HaKorei HaMegillah, Omed v'Yoshev. He has a choice. He can either read the Megillah while he's standing, or if he likes, while he's sitting. There's no requirement that he has to stand. However, we should know that the Rambam Shita is that if someone is reading it on behalf of the tzibur, he should not be sitting, he should be standing. That's because of kavod tzibur. But even the Rambam would agree that in event that he read it in a sitting position, we fulfilled our mitzvah. Then the Mishnah says, Kra'o echad. If one person is reading it, that's fine. But even Kra'o shnayim, if two people are reading the Megillah simultaneously on behalf of the tzibur, notzu. The tzibur has fulfilled their obligation. And the Gemara is going to point out that normally we say that you can't hear two voices and discern one from the other. Trei koli lo mishtamai, but Megillah, and we'll see Hallel as well, are the exceptions to this rule. And the Gemara is going to explain why. Makom shenagu levarech, in those places where they have the custom to be mavarech before Kriyas HaMegillah Yivarech, u shalol levarech, in a makom where the minig is not to make the bracha lo yivarech. And the Gemara is going to ask, how could that be? Every bracha requires, every mitzvah requires a bracha, even a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Right. And the Gemara is going to reinterpret this, that this is referencing the bracha after the Megillah, not the bracha before the Megillah. That's obligatory. Now the Mishnah goes on to discuss Kriyas HaTorah. And we're going to discuss how many people get aliyos for the Torah, and whether or not we add a haftorah at the end of the Kriya. B'sheni v'chamishi, the Kriyas HaTorah on a Monday and a Thursday, in the morning, Shachris, and also b'Shabbos b'Mincha, Korin Shlosh. We call up three Olim. One is a Kohen, the other is a Levi, and the third is a Yisrael. And this is based on a takon of Ezra, that they would be Korei b'Torah b'Sheni b'Chamishu b'Mincha b'Shabbos. They shouldn't go 3 days consecutively without a public reading of the Torah. And this is codified in the Gemara in Bava Kama Daf Pei Beis. And our Mishnah is telling us that with regard to this Kriya, on these three occasions, on Monday, Thursday, and Shabbos in the afternoon, we call up three people to the Torah. That's Cohen, Levi, V'Yisrael. However, if you take a look in the Sugya of Baba Kama Beis, it's quite clear from that Sugya that way before Ezra, Moshe Rabbeinu had already established Kriyas HaTorah on Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbos. In other words, the concept of not going 3 days without the reading of the Torah, that was established by Moshe Rabbeinu. So what exactly is Rashi here at the beginning of the Masechet, of the beginning of this parak? Why is he emphasizing Ezra? And perhaps the answer is that Ezra expanded the original Takana of Moshe Rabbeinu. With regard to the original Takana of Moshe Rabbeinu, one Ola would be sufficient. Ezra expanded it to require 3 kruim. 3 people are called up to the Torah. Additionally, Ezra required a minimum of 10 psukim to be read. And not only that, in addition to the Kriyas HaTorah that we read Shabbos in the morning, which was established by Moshe Rabbeinu, we should read, according to the Takana of Ezra, the Torah again a second time on Shabbos, Mincha time, because of something called the Yoshvei Chronos. The Mishnah continues. The Ein Mosifin Alein. A Monday and Thursday situation clearly is a work day, and we don't want to be matriach the tzibur by adding other additional korim and expanding the kriya. So since Monday and Thursday are days of malacha, therefore we don't add anything beyond the 3. On Shabbos Mincha, since it's already close to nighttime, we don't want to extend the kriya in such a way that maybe we'll daven too late. And if the Ein Maftirim B'Navi, after the Kriyas HaTorah, these 3 occasions, we don't add a Haftorah. It seems that there were places where they did add a Haftorah on Shabbos Mincha. There was such a minhag. But the Mishnah doesn't recognize it. The original minhag, as reflected here in these words of the Mishnah, is that the first person who got the Aliyah and the last person who got the last Aliyah would recite the brachos. The first person who opened up the Kriya, he would be Mavarach before they began the Kriya. He would not recite a bracha at the end of his particular Aliyah. It's only the third Ola who came up third, he would recite a bracha on the Chasima, closing it. So you had a bracha at the beginning before the first Aliyah and a bracha at the end after the third Aliyah. And the others who came in between would not make a bracha. That was the original minhag as codified here in the Mishnah. We'll see that there was a later takana, the Gemara is going to explain, that in case there are nichnasim v'yotzim, so they made a requirement that every single Ola should recite the bracha. Now we jack up the number of kruim from 3 to 4, because Rosh Chodesh is a day that has a certain special sanctity, and of course, Chol HaShel has a sanctity of Samachta B'Chagecha, and we have to reflect that extra sanctity by adding another Ola. Again, there are greater sanctities, as we'll see, Yom Tov, and then Yom Kippur, and then Shabbos, then we'll jump up from 4 to 5, 5 to 6, 6 to 7. Once again, no less than 4 kruim, and no more than 4 kruim. Notice there are no Osafos, because once again, these are work days. Although on Rosh Chodesh is a minhag not to do malacha, but according to the strict letter of the law, it's absolutely permissible to do malacha on Rosh Chodesh, and if it's a day of malacha, bitul malacha, if we don't want to be matriach on the tzibur by adding extra korim. And even Chol HaMoed, where the Torah does prohibit malacha, nevertheless, you're allowed to do what's called meleches davar avud, and since there are categories other than davar avud as well, where you're allowed to do malacha, therefore it's a day of bitul malacha. And also, the ein maftirin b'navi, we don't have a kriyas hanavi that follows the kriyas haTorah. The Mishnah continues, haposeach v'achosim b'Torah mavarach l'fanel achreil. Now, we just finished saying that. The Mishnah is copying and repeating what it said word for word, that only the first Ola opens with a bracha and the last closes with a bracha. Why did the Mishnah feel compelled to repeat this? And we'll soon see later in the rest of the Mishnah, it's going to repeat it a third time. He writes here in the footnote, why did the Tana feel compelled to repeat this? You could have had a Havamina to say that since we're adding kruim to reflect the extra Kedusha Sayom above and beyond the Yom Chol, is therefore Yavar Kol Kore Lefanel Achrel. We should upgrade the Kriya, and each person who's Karu should be reciting a bracha before it and after. So that's what the Mishnah wants to tell me, that even though we add kruim, nevertheless, the bracha remains the same first and last. And we do not add brachas. And this concept that we have only one bracha at the beginning and at the end seems to reflect the following definition. All of the kriya is really one unit, one undivided mitzvah, and therefore we should not be breaking it up in the middle with brachas. But we'll see. The Gemara is going to explain why. Zakla kol sheyesh bo musaf v'eino b'yontif. We have Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed. These are 2 days in which we have a karba musaf, and that reflects on the special kedusha of the day. But it's not a yontif. In other words, it's not a full blasted yontif with an Isa Malacha. Although, as we said before, there is some Isa Malach and Chol Hamoed, but not a full Isa Malach. So the Kedusha Yom is still one notch lower, and therefore our Ba, we call our Ba because it has a higher level of Kedusha than a Yom Chol, but a lower level of Kedusha than Yontif. But Yontif, where we have a full blasted Isa Malacha, then Chamisha we call up 5 kruim. The Yom Kippurim, which has, in addition to an Isa Malach, it has a Chi of Kares, which Yontif doesn't have, Shisha, and we jack up the number to 6. And we're not worried about Tarachat Tzibur, because in the case of Yom Kippurim, there's no Heter Meleches Ochel Nefesh, so we don't have to give you more time to go home and cook and stuff like that. Shabbos Shiva, we call up 7 kruim because the Machal Shabbos is Chayav Skila. It's an even more severe violation than Yom Kippur, which is only Kares. And Pochsemehem Avol Mosifin Alim. Although these numbers indicate the minimum, but we can add extra. Now, what is this referring to? Mosifin Alim. The Ran interprets that Mosifin Alim means Din ze holech al kol aniskarim b'chelik zeh shal mishnah kol yom shasur b'malach yom tovim yom kippurim and Shabbos, that you're allowed to be mosif on all these 3 occasions. Whenever we add kruim beyond the number 4, then we're allowed to add even more than the minimum requirement, because these are not days of malacha, so there's no bit of malacha, and we don't have to worry about Tarachat Tzibur. That's the opinion of the Ran. However, there seems to be another opinion. It might even be Rashi's opinion. You have to really go through this carefully. That on Yontif, we do not add extra kruim. We call up the 5 and not any hosafa, because there is bitul malach of ochel nefesh on Yontif. So when do we finally remove completely the concept of bitul malach? That's only on Yom Kippur. And again, the Mishnah for the 3rd time, the Gemara says, Tana. We learned in the Brisa, it says with regard to Megilla in our Mishnah that you can read it whether you're standing or you're sitting. And the Brisa says, Masechet b'Torah. In contrast, with regard to Kriyas HaTorah b'Tzibur, the din is not the same. And you have to read the Torah be'amida and not be'yeshiva. That's what it says in the Brisa. And this has to do with a concept called yira, a kind of trembling and fear in front of the Almighty. But for the Eved, it seems, the Meiri says it and others, that you would be Yotze, even be Yeshiva, even with regard to Kriyas HaTorah. But however, for sure, l'chatchila, we should read it be'amida. Fine. Now, there is a shita of the Bach. He interprets that according to the Torah. Even b'diavad, if you read the Torah in a sitting position, you were not yotzei the chiyuv. Okay. Now, some say that the reason why Kriyas Torah requires Amidah is because it covered at Tzibur. And it's covered at Tzibur when the Tzibur owned him for Kriyas Torah, like Moshe Rabbeinu, who stood when he received and when he transmitted the Torah, as we'll see in the Sugya very shortly. Others say that the Amidah of Kriyas Torah is L'chvod Hashchina. That's the way my Rebbe used to always say it, that during the Kriyas Torah Tzibur, Elokim Nitzav Badas Kel, the Shechina is there, Shruya, whenever there are 10 people learning Torah, as the Mishnah indicates in the third paragraph of Avos. Rabbeinu Avram in Ahar says that this is a covered for the Sefer Torah. If you're reading from the Sefer Torah, you need Amidah. But then you could always ask, why doesn't that apply on the other, on Megillah as well? But I guess because Megillah doesn't have that same sanctity and sanctity of covered as a Sefer Torah would have. Minani Milu. From whence do we derive that for Kriyas Torah B'Tzibur we need Amidah? Omer Abayavo, the Omar Kroi. Now we're going back to Moshe Rabbeinu and Har Sinai, and he's receiving the Torah beyond the Asos HaDibros, the balance of the Torah, the mitzvahs. The Omar Kroi in the pasuk says in Dvarim Perek Hey, V'ato po amod imodi v'adavar elecha es kol ha-mitzvah v'achukim ha-mishpatim shatulamdem. So the Torah was given by Midah. It was given to Moshe. And whenever we read the Torah B'Tzibur, it's a duplication of the original Nesinas HaTorah LeMoshe. And just like the Torah was given to Moshe by Midah, so to Kriyas HaTorah, when we transmit the Torah to the public, to the Tzibur, we need a Midah. And furthermore, V'yodom Rabbi Avo, Il Mole Mikra Kosu V'yef Shel Yoma. Kaviyachol af HaKadosh Baruch Hu be'amida. When the pasuk says "V'ato po amod imadi means that God is saying, "Stand with me, Moshe. I'm standing and you stand." And this is all kaviyachol. Right? Kaviyachol means, it's not something that you can literally, describe God in physical terms. The word kaviyachol, which always reflects the Almighty God, means shelo yachol le'omer bo kach. It's as if to say, like we say when we talk about things that we shouldn't be talking about on Shabbos, we say nishtav Shabbos gered. So kaviyachol is like a nishtav Shabbos gered kind of thing. V'yomer Rabbi Avo, minayin l'rav shelo yechiv al gabi mita v'yichne l'talmido al gabi karka. How do we know that the Rebbe shouldn't be above the Talmidim, right, sitting on a couch, so to speak, when the Talmidim are on the ground, on the karka? But rather the Rav should give cover to the Talmidim, and he should be equal on the same level. Either they both sit on a couch, the Rebbe and the Talmud, or they both sit on the karka. Shenemar v'yato po amod imadi. And the pasuk says that Kaviyachol HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Moshe were equal. They were both standing. And from this we derive that when you teach Torah, like Moshe received the Torah, that Hashem taught Moshe the Torah, it should be Rav and Talmidim, Shava v'Shava during the Lim. Tanur Rabbanu, we learned in the Brisa. Moshe, the Ad Ram Gamliel, Lo Hayelamedim Torah El Be'uman. When the Torah was being transmitted, it was being transmitted by Midah, which means that both the Rebbe and the Talmidim would stand. Until now, we said that they have to be on the same level. But now we're saying they're all standing up until the time of Ram Gamliel HaSakin. Mishameis Ram Gamliel Yarad Choli Liola. From the time of the death of Ram Gamliel, and probably because of the death of Ram Gamliel, the man became weaker. And therefore, he couldn't stand during the entire Limud Torah, Lemedim Torah, Meyushav. And we learn Torah is sitting in a sitting position. And And this is the meaning of the Mishnah in Sota Daf Mem Tes, Mishameis Rabbi Gamliel, Batel Kavod HaTorah. Meaning the Kavod HaTorah ceased, it terminated, and they would no longer study Torah in a standing position, but rather in a sitting position. The Gemara asks the following stira between two psukim. Kosev Echad Omer, Va'eshev Bahar, in Dvarim Perek Tes, with regard to Moshe Rabbeinu climbing up the mountain in order to receive the first set of luchos. Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Va'eshev Bahar Arboim Yom V'Arboim Laila," and he sat there on the mountain. The Kosev Echad Omer, we have another pasuk in Perek Yud of Dvarim, just one parak later, and it says there, "Vanochi Amadati Bahar," I stood on the mountain. So it means that Moshe ascended the mountain, Har Sinai. He had the second set of luchos, which he had created, and Moshe Rabbeinu climbed to the mountain so that Hashem would write on these tablets the Aseret Hadibros, inscribe on the tablets. And Moshe says, "Anochi Amadati Bahar, Kayamim Arishonim, Arboim Yom, Arboim Laila." So what is it? Is it Eshe Bahar or is it Omed Bahar? Amar Rav reconciles this apparent contradiction. Omed V'Lomed, when he heard the Torah the first time from Mipia Gvura from Hashem, it's Anochi Amadati Bahar. But then when Moshe would study it and review it and dissect it and analyze it, he was Yoshev B'Shonah. He would sit down. That's why we call yeshiva, because when you want to study something in depth, then you're in a sitting position, in a standing position. We're too weak today to really study Torah in a standing position. Panina Amar, another way of reconciling these two psukim, lo omed v'lo yoshev, ela shocher. Moshe Rabbeinu was not standing, he was not sitting, he was sort of bending down, like a person who bows. And that shechia is called by Moshe Rabbeinu sometimes yeshiva, sometimes he calls it amida, because it's close to both of them. It's right down the middle. Rabbi Yochanan Amar ein yeshiva el lashon hakava. The word yeshiva, says Rabbi Yochanan, means nit akev b'makom. In other words, he stayed in a place for a long time. That's called yoshev. Like we speak about Yeshiva Beretz Yisrael, that it's a long time settlement. And here also, Moshe Rabbeinu for 40 days and 40 nights was up on the mountain. Shenemar, with regard to the travels of Bnei Yisrael in the Midbar, at the beginning of Dvarim, it says, Vateshvu beKadesh Yomim Ramim. It means they were Nisakev, they stayed in a place called Kadesh for many days. So we see that the word yeshiva, says Rabbi Yochanan, is lashon hakava, when you remain there. And therefore we have an answer to the question. Moshe really was omed when he received the Torah, when he studied the Torah in the Har Sinai. As it says, Vanochi Amadati Bahar. It says, Eshe Bahar, implying that there was yeshiva. The answer to that is Nisakev Bahar. He's now telling you that with regard to the first set of luchos, he stayed on the har boim yom, var boim laila. Rav has another way of reconciling this apparent contradiction. Rakos miyuma v'koshos miyushav. When there was soft, meaning easy kinds of things for Moshe to understand, he would stand. He was in a state of amida. But when he got to koshos, those were difficult parts that had kushos, that had difficulties, questions that required analysis. For that, he had to sit. The Mishnah says, "Kro echad kro shnayim yotzu." Even if two people read the Megillah simultaneously, they were yote.